A wealthy man rescues a homeless woman and hires her as a nurse for his sick son. But when he installs a camera, he discovers the unimaginable. The wind howled as Jonathan Westbrook walked along the deserted bridge, his coat pulled tightly against the biting chill. The city lights shimmered on the river below, their reflections rippling with the current. His heart, weighed down by the grief of losing his wife, felt as heavy as the night around him. Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice the silhouette at the edge of the bridge. She stood precariously on the railing, her arms stretched out slightly for balance. Alarm surged through Jonathan as he realized her intent. "Wait," he called out, his voice echoing through the emptiness. The woman turned, startled, her pale face catching the glow of a nearby lamppost. "Please," he continued, approaching slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "You don't have to do this." Her eyes, hollow with despair, met his. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're right, I don't," Jonathan replied, stopping just a few feet away. "But I'd like to. Let me help you." For a moment, she teetered, as though the decision still hung in the balance. Then, with a shuddering breath, she stepped down from the railing. Jonathan extended his hand. "Come with me. Just for a cup of coffee. Let's talk." Reluctantly, she took his hand. They walked in silence to a nearby diner, where the warmth of the coffee shop contrasted starkly with the frigid night. Over steaming mugs, she shared her story. Her name was Emma. Once a bright medical student with a promising future, her world had unraveled when her mother fell gravely ill. Emma left school to care for her, but after her mother's death, an abusive relationship shattered what little stability remained. Now homeless and alone, Emma had reached the end of her rope. "I tried so hard," she murmured, staring into her cup. Jonathan's heart ached as he listened. He saw not just her pain but her resilience, the same spark of strength he'd once admired in his late wife. "You deserve a second chance," he said finally. "I have a job for you, if you're willing. My son, Lucas, is chronically ill. He needs someone like you, a caregiver with compassion." Emma hesitated but nodded slowly. "I don't know why you trust me," she said softly, "but, thank you." Jonathan smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope pierce the sorrow that had engulfed his life. Little did they know, this meeting would change both their lives forever. Emma stood nervously in the grand foyer of Jonathan's home, her worn duffel bag clutched tightly in her hands. The space was nothing short of opulent, high ceilings, gleaming marble floors, and a chandelier that cast shimmering patterns on the walls. She felt out of place, an interloper in a world far removed from the streets she had called home. Jonathan appeared, his expression kind but serious. "Let me show you to your room," he said, leading her up a grand staircase. The room he showed her was modest compared to the rest of the house, but it was clean, warm, and more than she could have hoped for. "Lucas is in his room," Jonathan continued. "I'll introduce you, but please don't feel pressured. He's shy with new people." Emma nodded, her stomach twisting with nervous anticipation. As they entered Lucas's room, her heart softened instantly. The boy, no older than 8, was pale and thin, seated in a wheelchair. His bright blue eyes darted toward her with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Lucas, this is Emma," Jonathan said gently. "She'll be helping take care of you." Emma knelt to his level, offering a small smile. "Hi, Lucas. It's really nice to meet you." Lucas didn't respond immediately, but his gaze lingered on her, studying her face as if searching for something. Finally, he nodded. It was a small gesture, but Emma felt a spark of hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment. Emma threw herself into caring for Lucas, learning his routine, his medications, and his preferences. She read to him from his favorite adventure books, played board games, and even sang lullabies when he couldn't sleep. Slowly, Lucas began to open up, his laughter echoing through the halls for the first time in months. Jonathan watched from a distance, amazed by the transformation. Emma's presence seemed to bring a warmth to the house that had been absent since his wife's passing. Yet, not everyone was pleased. Sylvia, Jonathan's sister-in-law, made her disdain clear from the beginning. "You don't even know her," she said, her voice sharp as she confronted Jonathan one evening. "You can't trust someone off the street with Lucas." Jonathan bristled but remained firm. "Emma has done nothing but show kindness and dedication. Lucas likes her, and that's what matters." Despite Sylvia's suspicions, Emma continued her work, determined to prove herself. What she didn't know was that her every step was being closely watched, and the first seeds of distrust had already been sown. Emma's presence in the Westbrook household became a steady source of comfort. Each morning, she greeted Lucas with a warm smile and brought an energy that filled the once somber halls. Lucas's health didn't improve overnight, but his spirits soared. For the first time in years, he asked to be taken outside in his wheelchair, eager to see the garden he had only viewed from his window. Emma made it happen. She bundled him in warm blankets and wheeled him through the sprawling gardens, describing the flowers and trees with vivid detail. Lucas laughed when a squirrel darted across the path, his eyes lighting up with joy. Jonathan observed these moments from afar, his heart softening. Emma's patience and care had a ripple effect, her laughter and light began to heal his wounds as well. For the first time since his wife's passing, he felt the grip of grief loosen slightly. One evening, over dinner, Lucas asked Emma a question that stunned both her and Jonathan. "Why don't you have a family?" Emma hesitated, the fork trembling slightly in her hand. She glanced at Jonathan, who offered a reassuring nod. "I did," she said softly, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "But life can be unpredictable. I lost my mom, and I've been on my own for a while now." Lucas frowned. "You can be part of ours," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Tears pricked Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away, managing a smile. "Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot to me." While Emma's bond with Lucas grew stronger, tension simmered elsewhere. Sylvia's suspicions of Emma deepened. Convinced that Emma was manipulating Jonathan and Lucas for personal gain, she planted seeds of doubt in Jonathan's mind. "She's too good to be true," Sylvia insisted one night. "You're blinded by grief, Jonathan. You don't know her past." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but Sylvia's words lingered. Despite his growing admiration for Emma, he found himself hesitating. Against his better judgment, he took Sylvia's suggestion. He installed a hidden camera in Lucas's playroom to ensure Emma's intentions were genuine. As the days passed, Jonathan watched the footage with a mix of guilt and curiosity. To his surprise, the recordings revealed nothing but Emma's boundless kindness. She comforted Lucas during his low moments, celebrated his small victories, and treated him with a tenderness that no amount of pretense could fake. Jonathan felt a pang of shame for doubting her. But as his trust in Emma grew, Sylvia was far from finished with her schemes. Jonathan sat in his study, the dim glow of his laptop casting shadows across his face. The footage from the hidden camera played on the screen, and he leaned forward, his heart heavy with guilt for resorting to such measures. The playroom scene was quiet at first, with Lucas focused on a puzzle. Then Emma's soft voice drifted through the speakers. "You're so close. Just one more piece, Lucas." Lucas grinned as he fit the final piece into place, and Emma clapped, her enthusiasm genuine and infectious. "See? You're amazing," she said, ruffling his hair. Jonathan watched scene after scene unfold, each one reinforcing Emma's sincerity. She sang to Lucas when he was restless, listened attentively to his rambling stories, and wiped away his tears when he grew frustrated with his limitations. Her patience seemed endless, her kindness unwavering. When the final clip ended, Jonathan closed the laptop and sat back, exhaling deeply. His doubts, fueled by Sylvia's suspicions, dissolved. Instead, a profound respect and admiration for Emma filled his heart. The next morning, he approached her in the kitchen, where she was preparing Lucas's breakfast. "Emma," he began, his voice tinged with humility, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for Lucas. You've brought life back into this house." Emma looked at him, surprised but pleased. "It's my job," she said simply, though her tone carried a quiet gratitude. But peace was fleeting. Sylvia, noticing Jonathan's growing trust in Emma, escalated her efforts to undermine her. Late one evening, she slipped into Emma's room, carefully tucking an envelope stuffed with cash under the mattress. The next day, during breakfast, Sylvia made her move. "Jonathan, I need to speak with you privately," she said, her expression grave. Jonathan followed her to the study, where Sylvia wasted no time. "I found this in Emma's room," she declared, pulling out the envelope. "She's been stealing from you. I told you she couldn't be trusted." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "How did you find this?" Sylvia faltered but quickly recovered. "I was checking to make sure she was settled. I had a feeling." Jonathan cut her off. "I'll look into it myself." Returning to the study, he pulled up the footage from the hidden camera. It didn't take long to find Sylvia's incriminating act. Watching her plant the money, Jonathan's face hardened with anger. That evening, he confronted Sylvia in front of Emma. "I know what you did," he said, his tone icy. Sylvia's protests were met with evidence that left her speechless. "You've caused enough damage," Jonathan continued. "It's time for you to leave." Sylvia's departure brought a sense of relief to the household. Emma, though shaken, found solace in Jonathan's unwavering support. Trust, once fragile, was now unbreakable. The atmosphere in the Westbrook home shifted noticeably after Sylvia's abrupt departure. For the first time in weeks, the tension that had clouded the household lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Lucas's laughter became a familiar sound once more, and Emma allowed herself to relax. But the relief was bittersweet. Sylvia's accusations had left Emma shaken. That night, she sat in her room, staring at the modest belongings she had managed to gather. Despite Jonathan's defense, a seed of doubt lingered in her mind. Would she ever truly belong in this world? The next morning, Jonathan knocked on her door, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "May I?" he asked. Emma nodded, surprised. She took the mug he offered, its warmth soothing her trembling hands. "I owe you an apology," Jonathan began, sitting across from her. "For doubting you, even for a second. I let Sylvia's words influence me when I should have trusted what I've seen with my own eyes." Emma looked down, her voice soft. "I understand. I know how it must have looked, me, coming from the streets, with no references or history you could verify." Jonathan leaned forward, his tone firm. "What I've seen is someone who's changed my son's life, and mine. Lucas hasn't been this happy in years, and that's because of you. I won't let anyone take that away." Emma blinked back tears, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Jonathan. That means more than I can say." Their conversation marked a turning point. With Sylvia gone, Emma found herself growing even closer to Lucas and, unexpectedly, to Jonathan. The small, thoughtful gestures, sharing coffee, quiet chats in the garden, became moments of connection. Lucas, ever perceptive, noticed the change. One afternoon, as Emma read him a story, he suddenly asked, "Do you think Dad likes you?" Emma nearly dropped the book. "What do you mean?" she asked, flustered. Lucas shrugged. "He smiles more when you're around. He used to be sad all the time." Emma laughed nervously, brushing it off. But Lucas's words lingered, sparking a hope she dared not voice. As the household settled into a peaceful rhythm, Emma thought perhaps the worst was behind them. She had no idea that a new challenge was about to test them all. The morning started like any other, with Emma preparing Lucas's breakfast and humming a cheerful tune. Lucas, seated at the table, was engrossed in his puzzle, his face lit up with focus. But as Emma set down his plate, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. She steadied herself against the counter, hoping it would pass unnoticed. "You okay?" Lucas asked, looking up. Emma forced a smile. "Just a little tired. Nothing to worry about." But it wasn't nothing. Over the next few days, the dizziness worsened. Simple tasks became exhausting, and a persistent ache settled in her chest. She dismissed it at first, unwilling to disrupt the harmony they had finally achieved. Jonathan, however, noticed her pallor and the faint tremble in her hands. One evening, as Lucas slept, he confronted her. "Emma, you're not well," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Please let me take you to a doctor." Emma hesitated, her pride warring with her vulnerability. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you're right." The diagnosis came swiftly and shook them both. Emma had a chronic heart condition that had gone untreated for years. The stress and hardship of her past had exacerbated it, and now, without proper care, her health was in jeopardy. Jonathan didn't hesitate. "We'll get you the best treatment available," he assured her. "You're not facing this alone." Emma protested, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I can't let you do that, Jonathan. I've already taken so much." Jonathan's expression softened, his voice resolute. "You've given more to this family than you realize. It's my turn to help you." During her treatment, Emma had to step back from her duties, a decision that pained her deeply. Lucas, confused by her absence, grew withdrawn. Jonathan did his best to fill the void, but it was clear that Emma's presence was irreplaceable. Despite the challenges, Emma remained determined. Her resilience inspired Jonathan, who stayed by her side through every doctor's visit and treatment session. As her strength slowly returned, she began to see the depth of his commitment, not just to Lucas but to her as well. Their bond deepened, forged in adversity. And as Emma's health improved, she realized she had found something she never thought possible, a family who truly cared for her. Weeks turned into months as Emma focused on her recovery. Her treatments were intense but effective, and slowly, her energy returned. Jonathan ensured she had everything she needed, from medical care to quiet moments of encouragement. But what sustained her most was Lucas's unwavering hope. "You'll be back soon, won't you?" Lucas had asked during one of her absences. "I will," Emma promised, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "And when I do, we'll go back to the garden and watch the squirrels together." The day Emma returned to the Westbrook household was one of quiet celebration. Lucas greeted her with an exuberant hug, his joy unmistakable. Jonathan stood behind him, his eyes warm with gratitude and something deeper. "Welcome home," he said simply. Emma resumed her role with ease, slipping back into the routines she had grown to love. But something had changed. The bond between her, Jonathan, and Lucas felt unshakable now, as though the challenges they had faced together had fused their lives inextricably. One evening, as the three of them sat in the garden, Lucas surprised them with a declaration. "You're my favorite person, Emma," he said, beaming up at her. "Except for Dad, of course." Emma laughed, her heart swelling with affection. "That's high praise, Lucas." "Thank you." Jonathan, seated beside them, watched the exchange with a quiet smile. He had always admired Emma's resilience and the kindness she brought to their lives, but now he realized something more. He had come to rely on her, not just for Lucas but for himself. Later that night, Jonathan found himself in the study, gazing out at the moonlit garden. His mind drifted to all that Emma had endured and overcome. Her strength, her compassion, and her unwavering presence had not only healed Lucas but had also mended parts of himself he thought irreparably broken. The realization hit him like a flood. He wasn't just grateful to Emma, he was in love with her. Determined to act, he began planning a way to tell her, to show her just how much she meant to him and Lucas. Their journey together was far from over, and Jonathan was ready to take the next step. The garden was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Emma sat on the bench beneath the sprawling oak tree, her thoughts drifting as she watched Lucas chase fireflies from his wheelchair, his laughter ringing out like a melody. This place, once unfamiliar and intimidating, had become her sanctuary. "Emma," Jonathan's voice broke the stillness, drawing her attention. He approached, his expression thoughtful, holding a small velvet box in his hand. Her breath caught as he sat beside her. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I met you, I was lost. I had resigned myself to a life of mourning, believing that nothing could ever bring light back into my world." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand, gently stopping her. "Then you came into our lives. You gave Lucas something I thought he'd lost forever, hope. And in the process, you gave me the same gift." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring that glinted in the fading light. "I love you, Emma," he said, his voice raw with sincerity. "I love the way you've cared for Lucas, the way you've brought joy back into this house, and the way you've reminded me that life can begin again. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Emma's eyes, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded, her voice breaking as she said, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas, who had been watching from a distance, let out an exuberant cheer. "Does this mean you'll be my mom now?" he called out, his face alight with excitement. Emma laughed through her tears, reaching for him as he wheeled closer. "If that's okay with you," she said, wrapping him in a hug. "It's more than okay," Lucas declared, his arms tight around her. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the very garden where their journey had begun. Surrounded by the people who mattered most, Jonathan, Emma, and Lucas pledged their love and commitment to one another, creating a new family built on trust, resilience, and hope. As Lucas proudly called Emma Mom for the first time during the ceremony, she felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. Together, they faced the future with open hearts, ready to embrace whatever came their way. The Westbrook household bustled with the sounds of life, a stark contrast to the silence that had once filled its halls. Emma stood in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch. The sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the space and highlighting the framed photos on the walls, Lucas smiling during his first school recital, a candid shot of Emma and Jonathan laughing during a picnic, and their wedding day, where Lucas had proudly stood between them. "Mom!" Lucas's voice echoed from the garden. He was no longer confined to his wheelchair, though he still used it on challenging days. With Emma's unwavering care and the tailored treatment plan Jonathan had tirelessly sought, Lucas had gained strength he never thought possible. Emma stepped outside, greeted by the sight of Lucas holding up a tiny bouquet of wildflowers. "I picked these for you," he said, his grin wide. "They're beautiful, thank you," Emma replied, pulling him into a hug. She kissed the top of his head, marveling at how much he had grown. Jonathan appeared from behind the garden shed, his hands streaked with dirt. "Our little gardener's been busy," he said, nodding at Lucas's handiwork in the flower beds. "Not just the garden," Lucas chimed in, puffing out his chest. "I'm helping Dad build the birdhouse too." Emma smiled, her heart full as she watched them. This life, so different from the one she had once imagined, felt like a dream she never wanted to wake from. Later that evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, Emma and Jonathan sat together on the porch, the night air cool and crisp. The stars stretched endlessly above them, twinkling with quiet assurance. "You know," Jonathan began, taking her hand, "I used to look at this house and feel the weight of everything it represented, loss, loneliness, memories I couldn't escape." Emma squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "But now," he continued, "it feels like home. Because of you." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. "You gave me a home too, Jonathan. You and Lucas saved me as much as I saved you." The night stretched on, peaceful and content. Together, they had rebuilt their lives, proving that even from the darkest moments, love could bloom and flourish, bringing with it a future full of hope and happiness.